And that was a crucial moment. If he hadn't, then Europe would have been overrun and Islamicized, the society of the morning land.
Okay.
Right, so Europe is the evening land. You see, after 1945, nationalism became a totally dirty word. In the 19th century, nationalism meant uniting people who knew little about one another.
Civilizational ethos they have with respect to the other bigger nations like Germany, France, and UK.
You see, compare with India. Just a few years ago, there was this split of the state of Andhra Pradesh. So half of it became a new state, Telangana.
Yes.
Gandhi didn't want to, grant political relevance to the religions. Then Nehru especially wanted the Muslims to stay in order to strengthen his own hand within Congress against those who after independence became his new principal adversaries, namely the conservative Hindus, who used to form the vast majority of congressmen around the Ayodhya temple. And so you see, for those people in the BJP who want tourism and not this old-fashioned and not so very lucrative pilgrimage, who instead want ostentatious tourism with nice plazas and so on. These house churches still have a tourist value too.
Yes,
why not maintain the real thing? Rahul Gandhi even made a big political issue out of this, saying that India is not a unitary state, it is a union of states. Now that is total nonsense.
Sorry.
Of course, I think that phrase in the Constitution is not so felicitous. Maybe you could rethink that. At any rate, it's not true.
Namaste everyone. Welcome to this podcast from Center for Indic Studies, Indus University, Ahmedabad. I am Samir Pande. Today I have with me Dr. Koenraad Elst. Welcome you, sir, again.
Nice to meet.
Last time in this podcast, we discussed about academic polarity, how narratives are built, how truths are made, and how the frameworks is all about. Today, I would like to ask more questions and try to find more answers from Dr. Koenraad Elst about what Europe is, how civilizations are built, and how we look at Europe and what are the crises that it is facing today. So welcome you, sir. And the first question I would like to ask is, how to frame the civilizational evolution of Europe? What is your thought about that? How Europe is built and how it has been learning from all the sides of the world, or what is it is teaching to the world?
Well, having lived in Europe for most of my life, I find it harder to see that as a unit than India. I mean, looking at India from the outside, obviously there is an India.
Yeah.
Then later you also learn about the differences between North and South and the rest. But still, so in the case of Europe, I'm more aware of the internal differences. Nevertheless, there are certain historical facts that perhaps you may not identify with, but are simply constitutive for the identity of Europe. Like one undeniable historical factor is Christianity. So I am an ex-Christian myself. Used to be a choir boy in the Catholic Church, but I very consciously broke with that, not because of any traumas or abuse scandals or something, simply because I was philosophically in disagreement with the basic doctrines. Otherwise, I have no bad memories or so. I'll defend the Catholic case against the Protestants and against the atheists anytime. Nevertheless, I just don't believe the story about Jesus and about eternal sin. Nevertheless, it's simply a historical fact that Christianity played a crucial role. You see, before that, there was, of course, plenty of religion, usually on a smaller scale. There was a certain continuous landscape of religion. The different tribes recognized their own gods in the neighbors' gods, like you can see in the names of the weekdays. The translation from Sumerian into Akkadian, Greek, Latin, German, and so on. You have the same gods with different names. So in that sense, you see, there was a certain, ideological unity. On the other hand, there was no consciousness of Europe as a subcontinent. And so that is what Christianity did bring. The use of the word Europe for the continent dates back at least, and as far as I know, to a document concerning the defense of France against the Arab invasion in 731. So it's Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, who defeated the Arab invaders. And that was a crucial moment. If he hadn't, then Europe would have been overrun and Islamicized. So even though Christianity was not native to Europe, it still defended Europe against the next invader.
True.
So that's very important. The name Europe, of course, incidentally, and since this is the topic you best know, the name Europe is much older, so it's pre-Christian, and it is very probably a Phoenician word, so Phoenician, Semitic, closest related to modern-day Hebrew, spoken in Israel. And so Arab there means evening. In Israel, you still have an evening newspaper, Ha'erev, the evening.
Okay.
And so this Arab, Europa, means evening land, which is precisely what Europe is poetically also called.
Yes.
Just like Asia is called the morning land.
Yeah.
Like in Germany, the Orientalist Association is called the Morgenländische Gesellschaft, the Society of the Morning Land.
Okay.
Right, so Europe is the evening land. There are, in Europe it is often said that this really comes from the Greek, where eurus means broad and ops means look, see. And so Europe means broad vision. That's a bit of a self-flattering etymology.
True.
There's no harm in it. Nevertheless, I prefer the historic facts. Okay, so initially that meant in the Aegean Sea, the sea between Greece and Turkey, it meant the west side of that sea, so Greece, and Asia meant the east side, which is Turkey. And then it took centuries before that was expanded to all of the west and all of the east. Okay, so that's Europe. So it becomes conscious typically with Charles the Hammer and his grandson Charlemagne. So he was a successful conqueror, and he conquered practically exactly the same territory as in 1957 started the European community.
Okay.
The Providence or something, except for southern Italy, it's exactly the same territory.
Oh.
And then he got crowned emperor by the Pope, so that's the start of the Holy Roman Empire. And so from then on, you get a strong feeling of Europeanness, even those parts that fall outside that empire, like England. And so it is mainly the church that creates this feeling of a common culture. So that's Europe for you. So then all kinds of things happen with all kinds of conflicts and differences, as you have in India also. Um, but nevertheless, that feeling of we are all Europeans, that was there. It didn't necessarily mean we are all friends. There have been rather serious wars.
Yes.
Nevertheless, there was a certain, unity of Europe.
Okay, true. Like there are many great leaders that came into Europe. For example, Napoleon Bonaparte, which united most
Yes.
of the land, and then there was unification of Germany and Italy,
Yeah.
and that unification led to creation of nation states, maybe
Yes.
states,
Mhm.
and then it had to face First World War and Second World War.
Mhm.
So after Second World War, we see that there has been many crises that Europe is facing. For example, the rise of USA and USSR,
Yeah.
Russia, and the Cold War between the both.
Mhm.
How you look at that period of time of Europe? Because
Well, one of the leading lights of the present day conservative revival is an Israeli philosopher, Yoram Hazony,
okay,
and he has written about nationalism in a rather positive sense. You see, after 1945, nationalism became a totally dirty word. In the 19th century, nationalism meant uniting people who knew little about one another. Like, for instance, the unification of Germany was about unifying the Rhineland and Bavaria and Prussia and so on, that, were big enough, like, to have little to do with one another. Only they spoke more or less the same language. And so the first endeavor of the nationalist movement was to get it into people's head, forget about Bavaria, think of Germany. And so you see how Zoni correctly observes that this really was a step forwards for mankind. That you see people started to look outside their village, becoming conscious of a larger unit. Often this went hand in hand with developments that I would call progressive. For example, the unification of Italy implied the swallowing into the new state of Italy of the papal state. So, I mean, from the viewpoint of secularism, this was a great victory. Okay, so this feeling of unity, of course, bumped into its frontiers with the First World War, when it turned out that people did identify with a larger whole, namely their country. But then the next larger whole, Europe as a whole, that was still too much for them. You see, in spite of the Marxist predictions that the German working class will feel more in common with the French working class rather than with the German bourgeoisie, that turned out to be not true at all. You see, everywhere nations united and fought for their nation. So, European unity had been already, thought up by poets, or by philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, for instance, a bit of a controversial philosopher, nevertheless was strongly pro-European. But so in practice, you see, the institutions to make that a reality failed as yet. So they gradually came into being. So since 1957, we have the European Community. Then in 1992, this becomes the European Union. And I dare say that Belgium is one of the founder states
yes, true.
of that. And probably the most pro-European integration member state, because Belgium doesn't have much of an identity of its own. You see, when I see my friends from the Netherlands, for example, many of them, especially in the conservative movement, are very, for their fatherland and against Europe, and Brussels is a dirty word for them. Um, so, like when the Brexit happened,
True.
England was leaving the European Union, and so it just so happened, total coincidence, that with a few friends, I was in a car on the way to Bath in the west of England. And so this was just the morning after the referendum. So the last results were coming in, and everywhere, all the pubs were open. They had English flags, not so much British flags,
Okay.
English flags. And, everybody was jubilant that they had voted for the Brexit. And so, we went to a number of these places to just smell the atmosphere. And so everywhere, I was wildly popular because I introduced myself. I am from Brussels. So, Brussels is a dirty word for many, and Trump even called it the hellhole Brussels. You see, if ever I don't know what to do anymore in life, I can start maybe as a tour guide to lead foreign visitors to what few nice places Brussels have left. Yeah, but so Belgium is quite in favor of this European integration because there isn't much of a Belgian identity. It's a very artificial state.
Okay.
It broke away from the Netherlands in 1830 for dubious reasons, merely by a coterie of French malcontents who were living in Belgium, nostalgic of the French Revolution. Then later joined by the Catholic Church because they didn't feel comfortable in Protestant-dominated Holland. Anyway, but so the living together of the French-speaking Walloons, the Dutch-speaking Flemish, it was always a bit of a problem. You can live with it, no problem. I don't lose any sleep over it, but nevertheless, it's also not something you're proud of. I mean, when I look at French people, they feel proud of being French. That I've never had. And so for us, it is easy to forget about the Belgian identity and embrace the European identity. I'm all for that.
Okay.
And so unlike most people I know who are, anti-European, I'm totally in favor of European integration.
True. Like I was reading a book from Frank Furede, The Identity of Crisis.
Yes.
And in that book, he was telling that how many of the nations in Europe, they feel disconnected from their own history.
Yeah.
So that's how the argument was made. And then it was also a book on Ukraine and its crisis.
Yeah.
So how people are looking to that.
Yeah.
So taking that point of view, I wanted to know that how Europeans from smaller states, which are artificially built maybe, and then how they look at Europe, or do they participate in the European Union, and how what are the civilizational ethos they have with respect to the other bigger nations like Germany, France, and UK?
Well, you see, dealing with the Ukrainian crisis is not exactly something that the European Union can be very proud of.
Okay.
Since the beginning, it has supported Ukraine, which in principle is correct because, you can't have one state invade another state.
True.
Even though some of these, what is called irredentist claims, you see, claims on lost territories,
Okay.
may make sense. Like there's a big chunk of Flanders which has been conquered by the French in the 17th, 18th century. And so strictly speaking, we could claim that, but I don't know. I mean, nobody's really busy with that. Well, since you mentioned a Hungarian, Frank Furedi, I know him. I mean, he lives in Brussels. And, speaking for Hungary, you see, Hungary has lost enormous territory in 1918, 19. And so, strictly speaking, they want that back.
True.
So, if everybody starts claiming lands back, we'll be in trouble. So, Europe has plenty of that kind of, gunpowder. I guess other countries too, but Europe especially. And so, this is one of the good things of European integration. All these things lose their importance. You compare with India, and I mean, just as a comparison I make like all the time. You see, compare with India. Just a few years ago, there was this split of the state of Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah, true.
So half of it became a new state, Telangana.
Yes.
And nobody talked about that. You see, there was an item in the newspaper. Oh, yes, there's a new state, there's a new border between two states. Yeah, well, yeah, interesting. It has happened before under the Vajpayee government, I think 2002.
Yes.
A number of other splits took place, like Madhya Pradesh.
Yes, Chhattisgarh.
Chhattisgarh was taken out of it. Then Jharkhand was taken
From
out
Bihar.
of Bihar.
Yeah.
And this made sense, that these tribal populations in those two states got a state of their own is very reasonable. And then long before, you had the Punjabi Suba, a state of the Punjabi language. In reality, a state wanted by the Sikhs. But still, I mean, I think, again, it's eminently sensible. Initially, you see, the Congress government was against all these linguistic states. But then, because the Sikhs had very bravely fought against Pakistan in 1965, they were like rewarded with the creation of this province. So, and again, you see, nothing serious happened, And so that could happen in the European Union, though it hasn't happened yet. Like a few years ago, there was this conflict between Spain and its own province of Catalonia. And so there was some talk in the air of separating Catalonia from Spain. In my country, for example, many people supported that. But, the European Union was absolutely against this, which I think is not really in agreement with the principles of the European Union. This redrawing of borders should be no problem as long as it's all within the same union. But yeah, I guess the spirits weren't ripe for that yet.
Because European Union is first and maybe the last type of governing style. Like many of the countries coming together, they are sitting on the same table and then discussing. We cannot do that with SAARC or the Southeast Asian or maybe even Southeast Asian countries. They cannot sit on the same table and like decide that we should have the same currency like European Union, or it can be visa free. Like one country provides visa and then one can roam all over.
That's all the Pakistani spies. Yeah. No, you see, that's of course because the fact that there are different states and, has a whole history of conflict behind it. Some of those conflicts are still quite alive. Other territorial issues, like for instance, the inclusion of Sikkim into India, which used to be a separate state. Is again, nobody, is busy with that. It was according to the will of the people of Sikkim. And other things are like a thing of the past. Like there are no issues between India and Sri Lanka. They used to be part of the same British colony. And so the British have, repeatedly imposed a partition, making Nepal a separate state and Bhutan a separate state and so on. It's only the partition of Pakistan that was, wanted by a certain section of the Indian population, not by the British. The British were originally against it. It's only when the Cold War started that they started seeing certain advantages. That if the subcontinent split, at least one part of it would flock to the western side. And but I mean, originally they were against it. They were proud of the empire that, in their mind, they had created. You see, because they thought, and you still find it in very many Western references to India, India never existed. You see, India was created by the British. Queen Victoria was the first monarch of the subcontinent. And so it was up to the British also to split it if they wanted. And so, because, it was their empire, nobody had ever thought of anything like that. That's what they thought. And so they were proud of their empire. Like the railways are always mentioned here. The whole railway system spanned the whole subcontinent. They thought, yeah, this is nice, this is the economic integration and so on. We want to keep it like that, even if we have to grant independence. And, this Lord Linlithgow told Jinnah to his face, he said, never. But then, the last viceroy, Mountbatten, when he came to India, he still thought he could avert partition.
In the initial
but by June 47, he too had accepted partition, just like all the Congress leaders who were originally against it, one after another crossed the floor. So in June 47, even Mahatma Gandhi, who had promised to stake his life against partition, he accepted partition. But so that was a totally native initiative. Yeah.
Two-state policy, like Hindus, a state of Pakistan for Muslims, that kind of split happened, and then we got this.
Yes, and it could have worked. I mean, it could have been a lesser evil. So partition could have worked, could have been acceptable, not as a good thing, but at least as a lesser evil. If it was done consistently. And so there we have Dr. Ambedkar's formula. Mind you, Ambedkar was very much a collaborator. He was a member of the Viceroy's Council. But so he used common sense when he said, okay, if we're going to create a Muslim state, then all the Muslims of the subcontinent go to that state, all the non-Muslims come to the other side. So that made sense. And he worked it out in detail. But you see, Gandhi, Nehru, and so on, they were totally opposed to it. And for a number of reasons, out of principle, Gandhi didn't want to, grant political relevance to the religions. Then Nehru especially wanted the Muslims to stay in order to strengthen his own hand within Congress against those who, after independence, became his new principal adversaries, namely the conservative Hindus, who used to form the vast majority of Congress members. So, for a number of reasons, this partition was a very mixed affair. And so they got the worst of both worlds. The simplification of the political situation that you would have had in a complete exchange of population, like happened between Turkey and Greece in 1923, that you did not get. But the violence that would have been averted, that you did get. And moreover, you got not only the victims of the partition violence of 1947, you got all the other victims of confrontations that continued to happen, like all the killing of Hindus in Bangladesh, that would have been averted if in 1947 there had been a clean separation. And, all the victims that are still going to fall, and I hope it's zero, but I'm not so sure, they can be, deduced from what happened in 1947.
Yes, true. So that takes me to another concept that has been
Yeah.
in discussion, which is secularism.
Yes.
Like how we can see secularism in Indic perspective in India post 1947, and then the same secularism, how it is used in Europe.
Yes.
What is that kind of secularism there?
Yes. Yeah. We'll have to go into more than one question here. Let me start by this. Since, we've talked a few times about the national symbols, in India, the secularists would like to have national symbols without any religious reference. So they want Ashoka as an anti-Hindu with his wheel. They want the anthem to be secular, whereas the anthem in reality says that, Krishna and Durga are the guides of the destiny of India. It's very much pro, the Hindu pantheon. The name Bharat refers to the founder of the Vedas, and so on. So, there is a strong religious history to India that you just can't deny. Now, the same thing is in Europe. There, too, you have a secular elite. You see, some people in India think that Europe is a Christian superpower. Now, that is not the case at all. In America, you still have Christianity as a political factor, more in the Republican Party. Even now, with a very un-Christian president, Trump, nevertheless, there is a certain, Christian presence in foreign policy making. Now, that in Europe is not the case at all. And this, secularism and militant atheism already exists for quite some time, especially in France. So it's, in the Catholic countries, you have a clean break with the church. On the one hand, you have Catholics, on the other, you have the total anti-Catholics. Whereas in the Protestant countries, you have a more moderate, changeover. And so in France, you had, for instance, in the colonial period, the French Third Republic from 1871 to 1940, and that was a militantly secularist regime. Yet, they promoted the Catholic mission in their colonies precisely because they expected converts to be more loyal to France. Like South Vietnam, for example, had a strong Catholic presence. And then in Africa, for instance, Christianity has really struck root, that many countries are really Christian. So there you see, it is true that the mission was used politically. That even people who didn't believe in Christianity nevertheless promoted Christianity because it would help the colonial project. But so today's European Union is not like that at all. In 2004, there was a project of a constitution for Europe. So strangely, the European Union already exists for decades and goes without a constitution. So then they wanted to introduce a constitution. It ultimately didn't work. Several referendums rejected it. So it was introduced anyway, but under a different name, a typically European Union. Now, the interesting thing is, in the preamble, there is a bit of musing about Europe's history, the prehistory of this unification. And there you see that they walk around the Christian element in this history. And So that's very much like the situation in India. They deny this religious factor. Whereas, whatever your position today is, this historical reality is just there. Um, even if that, history is a bit richer than just Christianity. For example, the flag of Europe has these 12 stars.
Yes.
This is the zodiac. Now, actually, that's not where it comes from. The designer of the flag had in mind the garland of 12 stars around the Virgin Mary, according to the New Testament. So it's very much a Catholic symbol. Yet, if you then study the Bible, you see that there they had, taken whatever profound symbols were in existence in the Middle East. So 1,000 years before that already, you had the zodiac. And so they had, integrated the zodiac into Christian imagery. But so when that was put to use by the European Union, you have to see the different layers, the Christian layer, the pre-Christian layer. So you see that religious dimension is there. Same thing in the anthem. The anthem is not strictly Christian. It dates from about 1800, and that was the time of not exactly atheism, but deism, like Thomas Jefferson in America, for example. People who were religious, who believed in something higher, but who did not believe in the funny claims made by Christianity. And so that's also very much there, like himmlische dein Heiligtum, your heavenly temple, So that religious dimension is there, but you see, as European history proceeds, that religious element is getting weaker and weaker, and is more actively, more furiously denied by the elites. So that is very similar to the Indian situation. Okay. Now, you see, secularism is very much a European concept.
Yes.
In India, it doesn't fit. In Europe, it does. You see, it was a necessary step, to overcome the religious conflicts in the 16th, 17th century. And so then that was settled after the 30 Years' War between the different religions. You got this Peace of Westphalia. And you see, that sets the stage for the next stretch of history with the nation state as the central actors. When, democracy is more and more getting accepted. And so the role of religion recedes. At that point, you see, secularism made good sense. You try to contain the role of religion so that it doesn't create conflict. You may, for academic purposes, make a distinction between what happened in Europe and what happened in America. In America, modeled largely on the Dutch example. You see, the Dutch state was Protestant dominated, but had different Protestant sects and had also a Catholic minority. And so they sort of found a compromise. The Catholics would stay in their corner, but they would be tolerated. Okay, since you ask for connections with India, well, in Amsterdam, you used to have a state of, let's say, oppression of the Catholic minority during the heyday of Protestantism. And so the Catholics gathered in house churches. So they were not allowed to celebrate in public, so they did it in house churches. Like you have Onze Lieve Heer op zolder, meaning our Lord in the attic. So you see, today, if you go to Amsterdam and you take a typical tourist, guided tour, they will take you to these house churches, which is interesting because I've like lived through it personally, that in India there has been a lot of controversy over what to do with sacred places. So in Varanasi, you had a cleanup of all the old buildings around the Kashi Vishwanath temple, unmindful of the fact that these old buildings often housed the equivalent of house churches. You see, when the Muslims, obstructed any Hindu life, you had a retreat of Hindus into, secret places where they continued their worship as much as possible. So around the Kashi Vishwanath, you had a number of these little temples. I've seen them also myself around the Ayodhya temple. And so you see, for those people in the BJP who want tourism and not this old-fashioned and not so very lucrative pilgrimage, who instead want ostentatious tourism with nice plazas and so on. I'd like to tell them that, these house churches still have a tourist value too.
Yes,
why not maintain the real thing? Anyway, okay, that was between brackets. But so, you had a situation of uneasy coexistence. In America, this was far more regulated. Every Protestant sect, that's how it started, got his own place. Like many of the 13 states with which it started, had their own state religion.
True.
Like the Puritans in Massachusetts and the Quakers in Pennsylvania and the Catholics, who in England were a minority, in Maryland and so on. So later that was abandoned, the idea of state religions. It's only the federation that was not allowed to have a state religion, as said in the First Amendment of the American Constitution. But so at any rate, that coexistence of different religions, that was institutionalized in America and worked very well. In Europe, it's a far more complex picture with different situations in different countries, also, changing depending on what party was in power and so on. All the same, you see, in the long run, it worked rather well. After the 17th century, not many people were killed anymore in religious conflict. Perhaps the worst was the Spanish Civil War, when the Republican government, which was very leftist and anti-Catholic, killed many Catholics. Then when the Civil War started, the opposite also happened. And so that's the last real, religious war in Europe. So I'm quite happy with the fact that we've done it. I won't say I'm proud of this. I'm not so sure that we had much choice, but at any rate, the right thing happened. Yeah.
True. Sir, little bit related to this, but another topic, which is the demography, which has been changing in Europe nowadays. There has been many countries which are seeing negative growth of their own people and influx of mostly this Middle Eastern or the Western Asian people into Europe. So what is your take on this influx of mostly Muslims into Europe and their idea of secularism, or their idea of what they call secularism, and what they are changing?
Yeah, there is, of course, a difference with what is happening in the immediate and what is happening in the long term. You see, what is happening in the immediate is that foreign populations come in with a foreign outlook. and, who don't feel at home in Europe, who try to maintain their own identity, and who are often openly hostile to their host society. Now, I don't think that immigration as such is much of a category. I mean, you have people like Salman Rushdie and so on who writes big books about, the immigrant condition and the identity crisis and so on. All these things will take care of themselves. Huh? Like identity, you see, there's many people who talk about identity in politics and we have to defend our identity. You see, identity is just there. To me, that's not a meaningful category. That's not something I'm going to fight for. Okay. Nevertheless, it's a fact of life. It changes gradually, but when people arrive, they bring their identity with them. That is true. Now, these identities are a problem in different measure. For example, if black Africans arrive in Europe, they're not much of a problem. Sometimes, of course, they come from a rather different culture. A second problem you may have between any two different tribes the world over is that they have less respect for outsiders than for their own group. To give a painful example, rape, communities are far more amenable to committing rape against outsiders than to fellow community members. So that's a fact of life. However, those black Africans usually do not form a hostile community. First of all, they're far more fragmented. Then there's in the main two categories. So there are people who, out of the middle of nowhere, arrive by boat, illegal, and so on. Then there are many others, and they have a big influence on the first group, who come from the Christian circles in Africa. Okay. It's very important. I mean, I know quite a few Congolese people, being from Belgium, who have been through the Catholic school system there. Okay. Have then obtained some scholarship for Leuven, my own home university, and then some of them staying on, and thus becoming, immigrants in Belgium. And so, they are totally culturally integrated. Okay. And they pose no problem at all. As for the others, they are less culturally integrated, but you see, in the long run, they will be. I mean, they don't pose much of a problem, as opposed to the Muslim immigrants who have a doctrine of separatism, of non-integration. And so even though there are, mutual differences, like, you hear regularly in our streets of a fight between, Chechens and Kurds, between Moroccans and Algerians, between Turks and Arabs. Those things exist. But when it comes to it, you have this pan-Islamic solidarity. Yet, one of my first articles, and this is like 35 years ago, had the title, The Threat of Islam. Okay. Now, I look back on that absolutely smiling, even though, this notion is still very popular today, because Islam is not as formidable as it seems. You have, of course, all these internal divisions within the Muslim community. But among people born Muslim, there are also many who, when they grow up, are not really part of the Muslim community anymore. You see, just like, when I grew up was exactly the time of the disintegration of the Catholic community in my country. Okay. You see, I was the first in my family to not go to church anymore. I thought at that time that that was a very revolutionary thing. You know, what I didn't know or only gradually came to realize was that everybody was doing this. This was happening all over. And so my generation practically collectively walked out of the church. When I went to study in university, many of my professors, and so when I look back on, you know, from the Middle Ages when the university started to today, that was the high point of priests leaving the priesthood.
Oh.
And so many of our professors, I was in the philology department, so we had quite a few people coming in who used to be in the theology department, which was Catholic, where Catholic norms were, you know, taken serious. So you could not be an ex-priest and be a theology professor.
Okay.
So, you see, but on the other hand, the university had a contractual duty to keep them employed. So it was better to, you know, use them. So they were transferred to the philology department to teach, of course, Hebrew, biblical Greek, and then Arab or whatever language they knew, you see, make them useful. And so that was very interesting. Mostly this was because of they got to know a woman and, you know, they wanted to leave celibacy, which for Catholic priests is mandatory, or simply because they didn't believe anymore. Anyway, so you see, on a large scale, you had de-Christianization going on, not just in Belgium, all of Western Europe. And it's now, with a half a century delay, also happening in many circles in America. Like the Irish community is largely losing the faith. The Quebec, for instance, was a Catholic stronghold. It's also the same story. So what happened 50 years ago is now happening in the Muslim world. And all the more so when Muslims are severed from their roots and are thrown into a society that is not Muslim. So you see there, I see a lot of people getting estranged from Islam. And so that's the first, that's the most, not the only, but is the most important reason why I don't see a threat of Islam. You know, we can handle it. I would say with Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany, wir schaffen das. We can do it.
Yeah, true. There has been rise of mostly this new conservative,
Yes.
new conservatism in Europe also and in US also regarding the civilizational ethos.
Yeah.
That what should be kept, what is American and what is European and what is German and that kind of things. So based on that, I would like to know your point of view, your thought on how to look at this multiculturalism and like individualism and communitarianism.
Yeah, well, here I have to repeat, first of all, you see, much of that, you know, conservative reaction right now is identity talk, which I don't like. You know, we have to do simply what is right. You know, there's not, you know, if we want to defend women's rights, for example, against Islam, well, that's because I think, you know, this is the correct thing to do, not because it is especially European. Though I'd like to emphasize, by the way, that it happens to be European. You see, in the Middle Ages, both Arabs and Europeans reporting on each other's country are in unison, all of them, to report that women in Europe are a lot freer, are a lot higher on the social ladder than in the Arab countries. And so at that time there was no feminism yet. But you see, there was a European tradition of, you know, galanterie, you know, of chivalry. And like, for example, I saw a interesting little movie about, you know, a sociologist or whatever, trying to get 10, 12-year-old boys to beat up a girl of their own age.
Oh.
Yes. And so all of them refused.
Okay.
Maybe later on in life they will do it anyway.
But
But you see, at that age, for all kinds of different reasons. Like, for instance, one of them was a very serious Catholic, and he said, no, Jesus doesn't allow this.
okay.
Yeah. And so others for other reasons and so on, but they all ended up not doing it. There is this famous experiment, much discussed by psychologists, the Milgram experiment,
Okay.
which shows that, you see, people are capable of torturing their fellow men if some authority in a white doctor's coat tells them to. Now here, you had people looking up to authorities, not just by profession, also by age.
Yeah.
You see, that it's just, 12-year-old boys who looked up to these people. Nevertheless, they still refused. You see, they thought, no, you see, the man does not do a thing like this. See, now that's European. In fact, some filmmaker in my country, he made these documentaries in the Middle East. And one thing he noted was that, in many of the pubs and public places, there are no women.
Okay.
And so he said, a pub without women, that's the border of Europe.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't remember what your question was.
My question was related to like how Europe see individualism and communitarianism and related to that.
Yeah, about individualism, there is too much. Absolutely. After my divorce, I live alone.
Okay.
Yeah. And so sometimes when there are riots, you see the effect. All these North African boys, for example, as soon as there is a signal of any conflict, they stick together.
Okay.
And, Europeans don't have that reflex anymore.
So
Yeah.
because I was reading Alvin Toffler's book, The Future Shock.
Yeah.
In 1960s, 70s, he had written that there would be fractured families in coming.
No, that is absolutely there.
So that was, he predicted that.
One of the things I have always found so charming in visiting Hindus, and so I've often enjoyed the hospitality of Hindu families, is precisely that very happy family spirit. Now, of course, I realize that is a bit self-selective, because people who have a troubled home situation are not going to invite you. So, in a sense, you see, that doesn't prove anything. But still, I mean, in any normal situation, anywhere on earth, you're going to have more community than in Europe today.
True. Regarding, like, last two questions maybe. Regarding what should be the message from Europe to India and what can be the message from India to Europe? What can be that?
Well, you see, coming to India, I am learning a lot from India that Europe could use. The other way, I'm not so sure. One thing very, very, very stereotypical, I'm sorry, but nevertheless it is true, is the matter of corruption. You see, in Europe, it's not that corruption doesn't exist, but it comes out in the open much sooner. It is more, made work of by critical journalists and so on. Here I see plenty of it going unreported, certainly unremedied. So if Europe has anything to teach India, it would be in that field. Otherwise, I think India is doing things very well. Like, the reaction against terrorism recently in Pahalgam, this Sindoor operation was very well conducted, with a lot of results. I mean, You look at the situation in Ukraine, what we could have done. There are certain things that India simply does very well. One important one important difference. The Indian constitution says that India is a union of states. Rahul Gandhi even made a big political issue out of this, saying that India is not a unitary state, it is a union of states. Now that is total nonsense. Of course, I think that phrase in the constitution is not so felicitous. Maybe you could rethink that. At any rate, it's not true. A union of states means exactly that which has happened in the European Union, namely a number of states that get together and throw their lot in together.
Yes.
And transfer, sovereignty in certain fields to this common level. That's not what has happened in India. You see, there was one regime, a bit compartmentalized. Essentially, there was one British India, where some states were nominally independent but still subservient to British India and so on. And so that all got together. That is to say, essentially that continued. And then, the states themselves had no say in that. It's not like a number of states came together. You see that Karnataka had a meeting with Andhra and with Maharashtra, and they decided this and that. No. Whereas France and Italy and, they did get together and decide certain things. So that's a big difference. And, that has certain historical reasons which are, innocent. Which are what they are, and you're just now doing the right thing. And I think Europe is also doing the right thing in that regard. But you see, one thing that strikes me is that there is a lot more belief in the future at the moment in India than in Europe. You see, Europe has this, depressed state, although the rise of these conservative parties may be the beginning of a difference. And it struck me a few months ago when I heard of China being less hostile to India. Why? What does this have to do with it? Well, you see clearly the strategists in Beijing have said, well, the news of the downfall of the West was a bit premature.
Okay.
There is a certain revival in the West going on. In America, quite spectacularly with Trump's election.
True.
But in Europe, this was already going on. You see, a number of these right-wing parties had been coming to power.
Yes.
But so it's only one at a time. It's not as spectacularly as in America, but it's a real evolution that's going on. So in Beijing, where they're not sentimental and moralistic, where they simply look at the power equation, they see, you see, there is a certain, Europe getting up again. And that indeed is happening. The last place where it will happen is Belgium, where, because of the political structure, no serious changes are possible. It's not like Italy or so. Italy, for example, which is doing quite well right now with Giorgia Meloni, or Sweden or Denmark and so on, which are, getting serious again. So in Belgium, it's very difficult to change anything because of the dividedness of political power. So with every group, sabotaging the others. It'll only happen when it has happened everywhere else. Then out of conformism, Belgium will follow suit.
There is European Union, which we have in Europe. Can there be another union-like thing in the world? What is your take on that?
Well, I think that is somewhat happening. Like in South America, there is more cooperation.
Mercosur is there.
Yeah. Then I don't follow the situation in Africa really.
Okay.
I know that Gaddafi in his days was in favor of an African Union.
There was.
I don't know how that is faring, but of course, of course that's possible. You know, we were like forced into it by the world wars. But I mean, this is a normal instinct, you know, that others can follow too.
So with that, we can like conclude the podcast. Do you have any message, sir, for like?
No, no. Why should I have a message? Especially because I think India is doing the right thing. I mean, it is on the right track. I hear from the opposition stuff about unemployment and other, you know, developmental issues. I think in terms of development, Modi is doing quite well.
Yes.
You know, he has promised development from the beginning. He took the votes of the Hindus who assumed that he was going to do anything pro-Hindu. He hasn't. But nevertheless, I have to, you know, absolutely concede that in terms of development, you know, India is progressing impressively. And also in terms of remedying terrorism. You see, Pahalgam was a sensation precisely because it had become so unusual.
True.
You know, 15 years ago, this happened all the time. And so, no, you see, in that respect, the BJP has done very well. Now, also, Operation Sindoor, you know, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I mean, I don't follow military issues very much. So it was, you know, we didn't know. But you see, it turns out that, you know, far from the cameras, they have taken some correct decisions in terms of military purchases and,
Yes.
you know, those things, which, you know, Pakistan just can't match. So this is a very good development. And, you know, though I am not in favor of countries falling apart, I think Pakistan is in trouble. And that's only the state of Pakistan that is in trouble. For the Pakistanis themselves, it may be a good thing. You know, I absolutely wish the Baluchis a great success in their independent state.
True.
I do wish that the Punjabis and the Sindhis find back their, you know, their proper place in India. I hope that the Pashtuns get together with the Afghan Pashtuns and so on, and that they guarantee the religious freedom of the Kalash, Kafirs, and other minorities in in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. I mean, I'm all in favor of freedom and progress and so on. Why not? But so the course that India is taking at this moment is having a good effect in India and is gradually also going to influence the neighboring countries in a good sense.
True.
So, you know, there are problematic parts of the world, but at the moment, India is doing the right thing. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So we end our podcast. Thank you for joining us. Like video, subscribe the channel, and share as much as you can. Thank you very much. Jai Hind. Thank you, sir.